When we talk about city budget, all too often the flood of numbers and percentages can quickly become overwhelming. After all, when you're trying to talk about how a couple $100 million gets spent, things can get complicated very quickly. But the truth is, the city budget works a lot like any household, just bigger. Revenue comes in, expenses go out. And just like you, the city can't spend more money than it makes. Of course, it can borrow money, but paying it back, what we call debt service, has to be factored into budget over time, just like you might finance a car or house. By law, Little Rock has to operate on a balanced budget. So how does the city make money? Well, the vast bulk of it, nearly half of all revenue in recent years, or more than $100 million, comes from sales tax. Little Rock has one of the lowest sales tax rates in the state and one of the lowest in the region for a city its size. A little more than a penny of virtually every dollar spent in the city ultimately comes back to the municipal government to fund operations. The other half of the city's revenue comes from four main areas: franchise fees, licenses and permits, property taxes, and a small bucket of other sources. Little Rock makes money from the utilities, but not from providing utility service directly. Unlike some cities, Little Rock doesn't own the electric company. But those companies who run the utilities here, gas, electric, even cable TV, pay what's called a franchise fee to use the city's property where they run their pipes and cables. These fees amount to about $30 million a year. When we talk about permits and licenses, that is the money developers pay in building permits to start new construction of houses, shopping centers, anything they're building. But it also includes annual business licenses and things like that. These payments amount to more than $10 million a year. Also, a small percentage of the personal property taxes you pay are given to the city, though the bulk of them go to school districts and entities like the Central Arkansas Library System, which aren't part of Little Rock's government but do work very closely with us, as well as the county government. The city's portion is about $30 million a year. Finally, we have everything else. That might be a fee you pay to go golfing or rent a pavilion in a city park. Basically, any other direct fee paid to the city. Again, this amounts to about $30 million a year. Together, these sources, along with sales tax, make up over $200 million in annual revenue. The rest of the city's money comes from specific funds devoted to specific purposes, like waste disposal and parking garages. All combined, that revenue was more than $270 million in 2021. So where does that money go? Well, it pays for everything you find in the city: the parks, police and fire protection, trash service, street paving, and so on. Everything. An important concept to help in understanding the city budget is the idea of funds we mentioned a second ago. The city has specific funds for streets, vehicle storage facilities, waste disposal, and parking garages. Those funds are restricted in both the revenue they bring in and the expenses they send out. Everything else, though, comes out of what's called the general fund, and that's often what we mean when we talk about the city budget. The general fund is by far the largest in terms of both revenue and expenses, about 80% of all of the city's finances, and it may help to think of it as the city's checkbook. When Little Rock needs to buy a new computer or hire a new accountant and provide benefits for her, that money comes out of the general fund. More than half of the general fund is devoted to public safety. This includes our police and fire departments, which not only provide the uniformed officers, but also the dispatchers and other emergency response communications personnel. Together, these two departments alone represent nearly $140 million in spending each year. The rest of that money goes toward other city operations, whether that's our parks and zoo or our supporting departments like finance, human resources, and IT. It's more than $70 million in expenses from the general fund. As is the case for most large employers, the biggest expenses for the city are payroll and benefits like health insurance for the employees who provide public services. Who decides how much money each department gets? Each fall, directors of all the various city departments sit down with the chief executive and administrator of the city, that is the mayor and city manager, and present plans for their department. They discuss staffing levels, equipment needs, and so on, everything they need to provide services for the residents of the city. Executive Administration works with the Finance Department, led by the Chief Financial Officer, to present a budget, a plan of spending for the upcoming fiscal year. That budget is ultimately sent to the city's Board of Directors for a vote. Once approved by the board, the city is free to spend money in accordance with its approved budget. How can you become involved? As city administrators work through the budget process each fall, usually beginning in October and continuing through December, the public is invited to weigh in. Of course, not all requests can be accommodated, but city officials are ultimately responsible to the public and welcome public input in expressing spending priorities. Residents can likewise contact the representatives on the Board of Directors who get to weigh in on the budget before they vote to approve it.
Hi, I'm Mayor Frank Scott Jr. I hope you found this quick overview of how the city makes and spends money useful. My administration has always sought to be responsive and transparent in stewardship of public resources. We want you to know where your tax dollars are going, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have. As we prepare a spending plan for the upcoming year, we want to know what your vision for Little Rock is and what you think the city's spending priorities should be. Please email me at mayorscott@littlerock.gov or please call 501-371-4744. I appreciate you and your choice to make Little Rock your home.